Hi, this is just sort of a short impromptu video I wanted to make really quick before I send these units back to their owner. So I've been working on these for the last couple of months on and off as I've had time with all of the more modern things that I work on. And what we have here is a model 2401 stereo amplifier and a model 2402 AM/FM tuner. And these were sent in by a customer. They're in a house that he bought recently, and he kind of said they kind of sort of worked, but based on just some of the things I saw, I doubt that they actually worked much at all. These are two of the very best models that NuTone ever made. These particular ones are probably from 1960 or 1961. It's the early version of the tuner, so it's AM and FM. The later ones were AM, FM, and FM stereo, and they're a somewhat different tuner. And I think I have another video I made about working on one of those previously. However, this is not a repair video. I just sort of wanted to go over some of the things that it takes, that you have to do to bring these units back to life and make them safe and reliable in today's world, because it is somewhat of a challenge. Just to say in round numbers, they're from 1960. That makes them 58 years old. Anytime you're working on equipment that's that old, a lot of things are obsolete, a lot of things are not available anymore. So oftentimes you have to pull out all the stops, use all your tricks to get them back in good working order so they'll be reliable going forward. So I just thought I would kind of go through that a little bit and show you some of the things I did. It's a little hard to show you much of the internal parts of the tuner because we have the tuning dials here. You've got AM on the left and FM on the right, and then you've got the variable tuning condensers here at the top, which I'll show you in a second, and you've got these big tuning pulleys and the dial cords, so when you turn the knobs the pointers move back and forth. And one of the real pains on working on one of these is to get to this part of underneath the chassis under here, you have to take all of this off, and the reality is you have to de-string the tuner cords and then put them back on, and I can tell you nobody likes doing tuner cords. Stringing tuner cords is just a total pain in the neck. Complicated, and you've got to get it just right or else it doesn't work properly. So I can't really show you much inside there, but we can turn it around and look at the other side. In this close-up shot of the top of the chassis, you can see we have a variety of things. We have a power transformer here. We have our FM variable condenser, our AM variable condenser. There's a single coil here. There are other coils down underneath the chassis, and you have little adjustments here and so forth. You've got other tuning coils here for alignment, and then you have the 10 vacuum tubes that make it all operate. So there's not a lot to see, although it is a very cool design and it's very classic for the early 1960s for an AM/FM type of tuner. Like most of these units, when you get them in, one of the problems you find is a variety of the tubes are bad. Out of the 10 tubes, I think there were 5 that were bad, 4 or 5 that had to be replaced, which is not too bad, pretty typical. The biggest problem on these are these. These are CAN capacitors. I'm going to show you more about that on the amplifier because it's easier to see, but you can actually, what we've done here is, if I carefully wiggle this, we can pop it out of the chassis. Ooh, how's that? And you know what? With this taken out of the chassis, it'll still work. Why? Well, because this has been bypassed. This type of device, these are very rarely available anymore. There is a couple companies that make them. However, they're never the right values, they're never the right size, they're never the right form factor, and there isn't anything that's just going to pop in place here and you wire it up and you're all done. So what you have to do a lot of times is you have to bypass these, and that's what I've done underneath it, and I'll show you more of that in the amplifier because it's easier to see. But of course, it's not really right. You don't want a big hole in your chassis right here. That's not really good. It looks bad. And so what you do is you bypass these and you clip off the leads so they're isolated. It's not connected to anything at all. And then you very simply put it back in place. And I'll bend the tabs over on the back side of the chassis so it stays in place. It doesn't fall out. And for all appearances, it looks original and as it was when it was made. However, it doesn't really do anything. And that's just kind of what you do. It's that compromise. It works perfectly, but it looks original, and it's a good happy medium. Just a quick note, because I just thought of it. If you're working on one of these, or you're going to have one of these worked on, one of the things you have to be really, really careful of is the tuning glass here. This is a real piece of glass, and it's printed both on the back and on the front. The white numbers and scale are on the back of the glass, and then it has this little chrome or gold accent here on the front, and the gold strips are offset of the white strips just a little bit, and I think the intention was to give it a little depth, make it look kind of 3D, which is kind of cool. Two things about this. One, these are always a little bit grimy and a little bit dirty. When you work on one of these, you have to take this off, because if you break this, you're never going to find a replacement for it. The only place you're ever going to get a replacement is from another one of these. So they just don't exist anymore. And when you go to clean it, what we do here is we use a soft cloth rag, and we use a little bit of plain cold water on it. Don't use hot, use cold, and we simply wipe it off carefully, and we put it aside. Because if you wear the markings off of it, wear the printing off of it, you've got a real problem. The other thing, just as a note of interest, there are two dial lamps, one here and one here, and they are these little globe lamps like this. These are GE number 12, and GE number 12 lamps are very old school, and they actually are sometimes hard to find. And just as a tip, when you're looking for them, these were commonly used in all sorts of accessories that were made for Lionel trains. So if you can't find them at your local electronics supply house, look at hobby places that sell hobby stuff and vintage Lionel trains and things, because Lionel signal towers and crossing gates and all that kind of stuff, they use number 12 GE lamps also, and that's a good place to find them. If you find them and you can get them for under $5 a piece, buy them, because they're expensive nowadays. Now let's look at the amplifier. On the top side of the amplifier, we have a ginormous power transformer here. These are the two audio output transformers. Inside the silver can is the relay assembly for the intercom functions on the 2400 system. And then we have a variety of our vacuum tubes. These four down here, these are our output tubes, so it's 2 per channel, because it's stereo, so it's right and left, 2 channels. This was in not bad condition. Most of the preamp tubes, they were all fine. The output tubes were all bad. That's why I don't think the system probably really worked at all. I think the rectifier tube was bad also. And then we have the same situation here as we have in the tuner, which is we have 2 multi-section can capacitors. This one has 3 capacitors inside of it, and this one has 2. And of course, again, it's the same situation where these are not available. You could not even find close values at this point with them anymore, and anything that was partially right was way too big and it wouldn't have fit inside the chassis. So we did a clever workaround to make it work right, but we left these in place just like we did on the tuner, so it looks original. In looking at the bottom of the chassis, what you're looking at here is this massive tangle of colored wires and components. All of the original NuTone tube models, the 2011, 2012, 2015, 2016, and the 2400 series, this all employs what's referred to as point-to-point wiring. There is no circuit board at all. You have the metal chassis, and then the tube sockets are attached to the chassis, as are other devices, and then resistors and capacitors and wiring is connected from the tabs on the tube sockets to wherever they need to go, and everything is wired from point to point to point to point to point. And what you end up with at the end is this maze of wires and components that you have to go through very carefully to figure out what's good, what's bad, what needs to be replaced, and so on and so on. In this section over here, on the top of the chassis, are where the 2 can capacitors I pointed out are located. There's one on this side and there's one right here. And those, just like the one in the tuner, those were removed from the chassis, and the leads, all the wires were disconnected, and the leads were clipped off of them. So they're merely for show. They're not functional. They're not connected up in any way whatsoever. They're just there to fill the holes and to make the set look original. And then what we do is we have to replace them or substitute them with modern capacitors. And fortunately, in a design like the 2401, there's a lot of room in the chassis for what we need to do, and that makes my life a little bit easier. And what we have here is, if I unplug this, I know this is kind of hard to see because it's such a jumble, but that's the way these sets are. This blue capacitor here, the big one, this small dark blue one here, there's a black one down underneath both of those on the right, this large blue one here, this large black one, and there's two light blue ones that are hiding underneath it, one here and one here. These make up and replace the two, all of the sections of the capacitors that were located on the top of the chassis. And the way those have to be installed is you can't, and I see this on a lot of sets and it's wrong, you can't have things flopping around in the breeze in here. Everything has to be secure and held in place. And while this may look like an enormous mess, and in some respects it is, everything is very secure. You know, you've got a little bit of wiggle room in the wires, and that's okay because they're not going to go anywhere. But all of the components are securely held in place. And you have to duplicate that when you add components under the chassis. It's not right that you don't clip a wire off. Let's say this red wire right here, this one that I marked number 26, you don't clip that off the bottom of the original capacitor and just twist it around the wire on the end of the new capacitor and solder it and stuff it in there and hope for the best. That's not going to work. They all have to be held securely in place, and you can see, you know, I'm prying on them pretty good and they only wiggle a little bit. You know, even this one down here is held in place pretty well. This one pretty good. They're not going to go anywhere. They're securely attached to at each end. And the other thing you have to do is, because electronic components have bare leads, the wires that come out of the ends of the capacitors, you have to cover them up. You have enough bare leads in here as it is, and you don't want things short-circuiting or touching other places where it doesn't belong, so you have to cover up the leads with this tubing to insulate it and so forth. So how do you do all of that? What you do is you need these. These are your friends when you're working on something like that. These are terminal strips, and this is a 3-terminal strip, a 4-terminal strip, a 5-terminal strip. They come bigger. You can get 6, 10s. They come in all different variety of sizes, and there's actually some of these originally in the chassis of the 2401. And what these are binding posts or tie locations where you can connect a wire to this one here, and then you can put your capacitor lead through here, and you wrap it around to hold it in place, and then it goes off to another one and you connect up the other end, and it gives you a point. Some people call these tie strips, and it gives you a point that you can make your wire connections and your lead connections, and then when you've got everything in place, then you solder them and it's securely held in place. The trick on these is it has this mounting tab right here at the bottom, and this has to be bolted to the chassis, and that makes this and this center lead here, this is part of the chassis ground, which you can utilize because there's wires that need to be connected to the ground also, so you can utilize that one for a ground connection or several ground connections and so forth. And you have to find places to put these, because they should always be as near the original location as is possible, and you have to have them bolted or screwed on securely because you don't want them flopping around because they're holding components. So what we do, or what I do, is I drill out one of the little rivets that holds the insulating plate for the original capacitors, and that's just a spot that the capacitor, you saw me when I snapped the other one back in the tuner, it's that little diamond-shaped piece of fiberglass, and we put a screw and a nut and we screw them to the chassis. So now we have tie points, and we can use those tie points to make our connections. The other thing you have to do is you need this. This is lead tubing. This is woven cloth tubing that's impregnated with silicone, so it acts as an insulator. It's rated for 600 volts, just like most insulation is, and you cut little pieces of this and it slides over the component lead, and it would be shorter, of course, so the component lead sticks out the other end, and you cover up the component lead, so if one crosses another one or it's near something, it's insulated. It's not just a bare wire. So you have to do that. That's for safety and to make sure your circuits work properly. So I think you can see here, this would be in the top right-hand corner of the underside of the chassis, and we have our 3 capacitors here, the light blue, the dark blue, and the black one underneath, and they're arranged so that the positive end of each capacitor is at the top, and it's going to a tie strip that's up there near the top of the chassis, and then these ends are all the negative ends. So what I decided to do was I put a 3-connection terminal strip right here. It's bolted to the chassis down there, and then I use, since the negative side of each of these capacitors essentially goes to ground, and that's how it was originally, what I did was I just used the center tab, which is the tab that's bolted to the chassis, therefore it's a ground, and each one covered up with its lead tubing goes over to the center one. The leads put through the holes, wrapped around, then it's soldered in place. So these are all tied into the chassis ground through this terminal strip, and that's what gives this some support, so it's not really flopping around. It's not hanging on the wires. You notice there are no wire ties in here. We didn't wire tie things together to hope they stay in place, because that's not the right way to do it. One of the other things that absolutely has to be replaced in this model when you get one in for service is this little critter right here. This is a Selenium Rectifier, and this is a very early form of a rectifier. It's essentially plates with selenium, which is an element in between them, and it acts like it's the equivalent of 2 diodes. And while this is a very early solid state component, it's not something that most people would expect to find in something like an audio amplifier. More commonly, you would expect to see it in maybe like a B9 robot or something like that. But they are in the 2401s, and when you get one of these sets in, this absolutely positively has to be replaced. Selenium is a toxic element, and if these fail, they will emit this ginormous plume of really horrible smelling smoke as they fail, and it's toxic, and they should always be replaced. So let me show you how you do that. In its original configuration, our selenium diode, it sat down bolted to the chassis right down in there where it won't fit anymore because there's other things now in the way. So it was unbolted from the chassis. The 3 connections, the 2 wires, and the output were disconnected, so it was removed altogether. Now it's a museum piece. And what you have to do is you use a terminal strip, which is this one right here. It's really hard to see because there's so much stuff in front of it, but it's a 4 lead terminal strip. You have 1, 2, 3, 4. The one that's connected to the chassis ground is unused. That's this one right here, because we don't need a ground in this part of the circuit. And what we have is there are 2 blue wires, one here and one here, that come from one of the output taps of the main transformer, and they're connected to the outer one here and the other outer one on the right hand side. And then we've replaced our Selenium Rectifier with 2 diodes. And these are modern solid state silicon diodes here, and it's wired in exactly the same way as it was in the original circuit. So it's here connected to one side of the transformer, and then it's tied together. This one goes here and it's tied together, and then it goes off and it feeds these 2 blue capacitors underneath. This is for safety more than anything else, and also for reliability, because apparently selenium diodes, when they go suddenly and unexpectedly, so you've got to replace them. One of the things you have to be aware of is, and this, I'm not going to get too technical on this, diodes have what is a voltage drop. So the voltage going into the diode will always be more than the voltage coming out. The voltage drop on selenium diodes is greater than on solid state diodes. So after you get this in place, you have to measure the output voltage on the circuit to see if it's within specifications. It's not, and if it's not, you may have to add a dropping resistor to lower the voltage down before it enters the rest of the circuit. That's just something, there is no table that tells you how much exactly. You have to look at the schematic, and you have to, it's a little bit of trial and error, but after you've done it a few times, you have a pretty good idea how that should be done. This is just some of the things you have to do to get one of these working again. Okay, I'm back. So you sat through me yammering on and on about working on 1960 point-to-point wiring amplifiers and tuners, and here we have it, and it's all set up and ready to go. I will say with great pride that when these sets came in, I consider them to be non-functional. I did a video where I went through the tube testing, which I may put at the end of this video. I haven't decided yet. Enough of the tubes were bad that it didn't seem worthwhile to just hook them up to see what they would do. The output tubes in the amplifier were all bad, so there wasn't going to be any output on that. Enough of the tubes in the tuner were bad that it most likely would not have worked very well. One of the things you have to consider when you're working on equipment from this era is if it hasn't been used in a long time and you find right off the bat you have a lot of things wrong with it, like bad tubes, you have to resist the temptation to hook it up, plug it in, turn it on, just to see what happens, to satisfy your curiosity. Because oftentimes your curiosity will be met with a loud buzzing noise or a loud humming noise followed by plumes of smoke coming out of the chassis as something fries. And many things in these units are close to being irreplaceable nowadays. The main power transformer and the audio output transformers in the amplifier, the only place you're going to find them is in another unit that you're going to rob them out of. Same thing is true for the tuner. I had one of these I worked on a couple years ago for a local customer, and the the main transformer in the tuner was dead. And I actually sent it to a fellow who's in Maine who rewinds transformers because I didn't have a unit to rob one out of, so we had it rebuilt because that was the only way to make it work again. I was very pleased. I got these all set up, hooked up a pair of test speakers to it because I'm not going to risk my good speakers on them. Let them warmed up, monitor the current very carefully on each one as they warmed up to make sure it looked like everything was going to be okay, and they played the first time. And that's always really nice after you've spent many hours working on something like this. So here's the setup. I've got the AM/FM tuner here. Our AM antenna is just this little yellow wire right here because that's all we really need for this. It's on a standard dipole FM antenna. You can see our number 12 GE lights glowing here nicely. And our amplifier is turned on. We've got a little neon pilot lamp here. These are all warmed up. I actually have played these already. This isn't the very first time for you guys. I've got it set up so it's hooked to one pair of real NuTone 2400 stereo speakers over there on the cart. It's hooked up to a standard door speaker. These models do have a chime input, and so I have that hooked up. I have that hooked up to my signal generator just so we can send a tone through it to prove that the circuit does work. And I have it set up to another pair of speakers over there on the other side of the shop. Those are special speakers, and I'll tell you about those at the end. Let's go ahead and turn it on and see what we got. I've tested all the inputs. I've tested everything. Everything does work properly. So we're going to go ahead and we'll put it on FM, or an AM first. On the tuner, you've got two selection knobs. You've got left channel input, right channel input, and you have to turn them together. It's not one switch with double gangs on it, so it's kind of a weird design, but that's the way they made it. So we'll put it on AM.
Fix your low water pressure, rusty water, or pipe leaks by repiping your home today. Repipe Specialist.
And we'll listen to this real pair of speakers over here. So these are our control switches. They're just three positions. We have off in the center. We have listen, which is be listen in or monitor to listen into a room. And then we have radio down here. This is the type of design that when you use the intercom, it doesn't mute the radio or anything like that. You're speaking over the intercom on top of the radio or on top of the music if it's turned on. So that's just the way it works. So we'll turn this set on over here.
Lifetime guarantee and 0% interest. Repipe Specialist.
And they play just fine. And we'll turn on my auxiliary pair over there.
Your free in-home estimate at 800-278.
And those sound really good.
That's 800-278.
And now we'll switch it to FM. Now, we can't play it very long, you know, copyright and all that stuff. So we'll do main pair.
Incredible racing, music, an air show, and kids activities at the Toyota
And if we turn it down a little,
tickets for just $45 each, plus a free trial ticket. Only at your local Lucky stores.
there are balance control,
Singled out because all of your friends are in relationships.
which works fine.
You love. Meet new people.
We have bass,
doing the things you love to do or have always wanted to do. Events and Adventures plans over 30 great events
which
for
is
singles
good.
every month. From outdoor
We have
recreation
treble,
to indoor celebrations to
which is
vacations.
clean, adjusts
When you
nicely.
want to work, you have all the fun.
Maybe we'll get some music in a second. And we'll turn on our other pair.
No profiles. Everything after
Turn them up a little bit.
naturally. Live a life you love. Get started at eventsandadventures.com. Events and Adventures knows how to make the most of being single. You have to get social.
Well, no music on that channel, so let's try our auxiliary input. So we have phono, tape, and auxiliary. Turn that on. And I have it just hooked up to my phone because that's easy. I don't think they would be listening to AC/DC in 1960, do you? Anyway, it works just fine. Everything is as I expect it to be. One of the nice things about this system is the remote speakers use 8-inch, 8-ohm speaker cones. It's the only system NuTone ever made that used 8-ohm speaker cones. And back in the 60s with tube amplifiers, 8-ohm speaker cones, you're rapidly sliding into that high fidelity range of designs for the most part. The speaker cones in the remote speakers, they're sort of your general purpose mid-range 8-ohm speaker cones, which are all right, but I think they could be better. And I have had some customers venture into the world of replacing the speaker cones, and if you don't go crazy with it, it's a standard size, so that makes it easy, and they bolt to the back of the speaker frame, so that's easy. And if you don't go crazy with speakers with ginormous magnets, you don't want to buy an 8-inch speaker cone and it's got a 3.5-pound magnet on it, because you don't really need to have that. But you can certainly, especially in your locations in your house where you listen more for the music than you would, say, in a standard hallway bedroom or something like that, you can easily upgrade the speakers without going crazy and improve the overall sound. I've never heard one of these when it was brand new, so I don't know how well the speaker cones have aged, but paper speaker cones after nearly 60 years, they probably could use an upgrade. At least a few of them could. So it's in good shape. It works well. Let's go ahead and feed in our doorbell signal. That's not what your doorbell would sound like in 1960. They had a mechanical 8-note Westminster chime that had electronic pickups, and it would send the Westminster sounds through the system. But it's just to show that the circuit does work. This was a very successful repair. It works well. Oh, I guess I should show you that the intercom does work also. So if I slide this over here, where you can see it a little better, here's our speaker setups. Now, this is stereo, so it's 2 channels. So we have A channel and B channel. A B channel speaker would just be the wooden frame and the cloth grill. There would be no controls, but these are kind of old beat up speakers that I use for test speakers because they kind of have a hard life here, but they work the same. So this one is wired up as the A channel. This is wired up as the B channel, so it's just connected to the speaker cones. The controls are all bypassed. It's just easier that way. And the way this works is the A channel station has its own volume control for this station, and it has the B channel volume control for this station, and then the A channel station has the intercom controls on it. And this is a pretty easy intercom system. You have 2 lever switches. You have listen and talk. And it's either inside listen and talk or outside listen and talk. And outside refers to the front door station, not a patio station. It's very simple. If you want to talk, turn that on. Just move it to talk. Turn it up a little more. You can hear it come out over there. And and then the other person pushes talk to answer back. If you want to talk to the front door, turn the volumes down, cut the feedback down. You turn the door speaker on by moving the lever to outside. And since it's in listen, you can hear the sounds on the front porch, and then to tell the peddler to get off your porch, you move it to talk. Comes out through there, and that's all there is to it. So the intercom works, the radio plays, the inputs work properly, the door chime circuit works, everything seems to be good to go. It's nice and quiet, there's no background hum. On amplifier systems, you always have a little bit of white noise because it is a tube set, so tubes have that, you know, warm fuzzy sound, which is just a certain type of distortion that tube amplifiers will have. All in all, it was a good repair. That's it. I hope you found this interesting and helpful. If you did, please give it a big thumbs up on YouTube because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here. Shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell or on the wheel, put in your email address, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.